Okay, so we are back at Rambam Bekius, but we yesterday did the Hakdamah to Iggros Moshe, and Oren wasn't here, and we knew that Oren would have questions, and he just listened to it, so he has questions. So we're going to start off with Oren's questions, which would be a way to review what we did last time also. Yeah.
Okay. So just to be clear, so just so my understanding is clear.
Yeah.
Basically, what he was saying is that the Torah is there, and that's like you said, that's like the empirical data that we can then use to darshan out not whatever we want, but whatever is reasonable.
Right.
That's okay. So one question is, what are the bounds of this? Like, can I do that to anything? Like, or am I limited to just like the 13?
Right. So that's
how's that?
Right. That's a good question. I mean, so just to repeat it, the question is like, what are the parameters of how much you can darshan the Torah, or like what tools are at your disposal?
Yeah.
So
how far can I go?
Right. Well, so I think those are two separate questions. One is, what tools are you allowed to use? And then with those tools, how far can you go? Right. So I don't know the answer to how far you can go with the tools that are given. Like I don't know. It'd be interesting to like just see what the most radical halachic drushos are that have been given, I just don't know. And in terms of the tools, I mean, we talk about the 13 Yugam Miyosh Torah Nidresh been the 13 hermeneutical principles, but there were different sets of tools, right? Like there were the 13, and then Rabbi Shmuel had his other set. Wait, no, that was the Rabbi Shmuel one. Rabbi Akiva had another set, right? So like, I don't even know the status of those tools, how agreed upon they were, and whether there were other systems. It is unfortunate. We don't really know much about that system anymore, and I think that's also part of a machlokus of between the Rambam and other Rishonim on what were Chazal doing when they were like darshaning, like I think there are I don't know who holds what, but there were people who held that like they're deriving those halachos from the psukim using these methods, and then there are others who hold no, they're constructing like their own rabbinic constructs or whatever, and then they are using the method of drushos to like associate it to the Torah's Beksav through Chachma, but it's not like it's derived from that. So that area is a little bit beyond my expertise. If you posted it in the chat and directed it at Isaac, Isaac is much more knowledgeable about that than I am. Yeah.
All right. So another question is, who can do this? Like you keep saying Chacham, but what does that mean? And also, when we say Chacham, is that limited to other people? Like you said, kind of at the end of the shit, that you only are Paskin for yourself. Right. Is that the same? Like, can I Paskin for myself at like not any level, but like any level? Like, is there like a different like minimum bar basically for like Paskin for other people versus myself?
Right. Yeah. So in terms of so when you say who can do that, we're no longer talking about drushos, right? We're talking about psak.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Because drushos can only be done through the mechanisms with the Sanhedrin, et cetera, through Beis Gadol. So in terms of psak, it seems like Rav Moshe holds that as long as you let's quote his phrase here again, as long as you are going after you've analyzed properly to sift out the halacha, to clarify the halacha in the shas and the poskim, kfi kocho, according to your ability, b'koved rosh, with the solemnity of mind and yiras Hashem, and fear of God, v'nir lo shekin hu psak hadin, hu ha'emes lahora. Seems like that would be as long as you can do that, even in a given area, like in other words, I think it does go by area, because it wouldn't make sense to say you have to be able to paskin on all Taryag mitzvos in order to be able to paskin on one area, Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And again, I don't know. All I can speak for is Rav Moshe, based on my understanding of him. I don't know if there are other views on that matter, but this is my understanding of what we did yesterday.
All right. So 2 more questions, and these I think are the bigger questions.
Okay.
So he starts off the whole Hakdamah talking about how there's like 2 truths, basically. There's the objective one, and there's the one that like we have access to, I guess.
Right.
But if you're going to tell me that God intentionally put in all possible opinions, basically, or all possible interpretations, then how could it be that these are 2 separate things? It sounds like there's just one.
No, so that's an interesting question also. So I don't, Rav Moshe never says, by the way, Shimon, can you hear Oren's questions okay?
Yeah.
Good. All right. He never says that God put in the interpretations. He just said that God put the crowns so that Rabbi Akiva can expound other halachos. In other words, the halachos that he's expounding are not necessarily interpretations that God encoded into the psukim. Now, there are people who hold that. There are people who hold that every single machlokas and every single shita and every single chiddush and every single thing that would ever be given, God encoded into Torah and they're just uncovering it. I don't think the Rambam holds that. And Moshe doesn't say that. I don't know what Moshe holds, but he doesn't say that. So I'll answer according to my understanding. According to my understanding, it is different. Let's use the classic case of Torah Peh. Basukos Teshvu Shivas Yam. You should dwell in sukkahs for 7 days, right? So that's the Torah B'chsav, and the Torah Peh, God gave to Moshe what you can make schach out of and what the dimensions of the sukkah are. That God gave to Moshe. But the crowns and the drushos are entirely human creativity. Those were not, it's not like there are interpretations that are in there that these chachamim are uncovering. That's my understanding.
Does that mean that if you're going through Hilchot Sukkot,
yeah,
right? So I mean, there's gonna be some times where that's gonna be stuff which goes straight back to Sinai, and some stuff which is not. I mean, obviously that's still right that they're running, but even stuff that's not like that.
Right. So this gets into another issue which is important.
How would I be able to detect?
Okay, so it's very easy, but the ease opens a huge can of worms. Okay. Let me think where the best place to find this would be. Let's go to the Pirish Mishnayos. The Hakdamah. We have not. 1, 2, 3. Go. Okay, so I'll tell you which page it is. Oh, is this a page that from Zvachim that has torn out? Okay. I just want to make sure I have all the pages in my edition. And again, don't say I didn't warn you. This is opening up a big can of worms. Oh, you know what? My edition is different than yours. Is there a, let's see. Anyone want to give up theirs? Thanks. I'm not going to be able to tell you the page number. Okay, and let's see here. I'll find it. This is gonna, this can of worms is enormous, okay. Like Costco size. Let me just pause this while I find this. Okay. So Rambam says like this: Pirish Mishnayos Hakdamah in page Yud Aleph in the Kafef. Nimsa lefi haklalim sheikdanu shekol adinim kvuim b'Torah nechlakim lechamisha chalakim. All laws from the Torah can be divided into 5 categories. Okay, Rambam. I love the fact that Rambam loves categorizing. Yeah, what was that?
Oh, never mind.
Okay, so Halachah Rishon, the first division, hapirushim hamukubalim Moshe sheish lahem remez b'kasuv o she'efshar l'lamdam ba'achas hamidos, is the received explanations from Moshe that have an allusion in the pasuk, or that it is possible to learn out through one of the midos. V'zeh ein bo machlokas klal. On these, there is no machlokas at all. Ella kolzman sheyomar adam kibalti kach v'kach mistalak kol v'kuach. Rather, anytime a person says, this is what I have received as a tradition, then that removes any argument. So he doesn't give an example of this. I'll give an example. Creates hadar means esrog, right? There's no machlokas, and you can't, it's not open in the pasuk, but it is a unanimous tradition.
But if I just read Rav Moshe without this, could I theoretically darshan out some other fruit?
Good question. I think not, but let's see. Let's follow the Rambam categories, and we'll look at it in light of that. Hachelak hasheni, the second category, him hadinim shebehem amru shehim halach l'Moshe misinai ve'ein alehem raya k'Moshe amarnu v'gam zeh mimash ein bo machlokas. Okay, so the second category is the laws that we call halach l'Moshe misinai, which the Rambam talked about earlier, which have no indication in the pasuk. And this is also, there's no machlokas. So famous examples of this, many of the halachos of the Moshe Messina are in tefillin, right? The fact that tefillin have to be black, the fact that they have to be square, right? There's no allusion to any of that in the psukim. It's just that straight halacha Moshe Messina, okay? Or nisuch mayim on sukkahs, right? The fact that you do a water libation, there's no allusions to that in the psukim. Okay, now here's the category where it gets dicey. Okay. The third category, these are the laws that are learned through one of the midos, and in them there has fallen machlokas, as we have said. And the halacha has been paskin according to the majority, based on the rules that we have said. When does this apply? When the matter is equal. In which case we say that if it's a halacha that was received, we'll accept it, but if there is an argument, then we have a response. Okay, this is
what does it mean by halacha that was received?
Meaning, if someone says that they had a tradition and it's on something that there's no disputed tradition, so then we just accept it. Like Ezra, right? Priyas Hadar, no one says I received a Masorah that it's not the Citron.
But isn't this a tradition? It's not from Moshe.
Oh, this is amazing. But if it's something they learn out from one of the midos, then it's in this category. The quote he said is Im halacha nakabel. That was category 1. The Im ladin yesh tshuva. That's category 3. Okay, or really it's categories 1 and 2. Im halacha nakabel, that's categories 1 and 2. That's something that's received that either is alluded to in the pasuk, that's 1, or it's a halacha Moshe Sinai, that's 2. And then the im ladin yesh tshuva. But if there's a derivation, then we have an argument.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, that let's say you and I are Tanayim, okay, and I say I got a Masorah that Priyat Hadar is a citron, or ayin takas ayin is monetary, right?
Okay.
So if no one else has any other received tradition, so then we just accept it.
Then why would that be in Shlishi?
That's in Chelek Rishon and Sheni.
Yeah.
Shlishi is you and I both argue about how to learn out something from one of the midos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that would be in the third category. That's Chelek Shlishi. Okay. Now here's the phrase, and this is the can of worms, right? You got to hear the pop. The only cases where we have machlokas and argument are in things that we don't have a received tradition on. V'timtzayim b'chol ha'talmud chokrim al darchei hadin shebiglalam nafla machlokas bein ha'cholkim v'omrim b'mika miflagi. So we'll find throughout all the Talmud cases where they say where they argue and analyze by analytical methods, saying like, what are they arguing about? Oh, my tama de Raploni, or what is Raplon so-and-so's reason? Or my benaihu, or what is the difference between them? Ki yesh shehem holchim b'derech zo b'inyan zeh b'miktas makomos u'mevarim sibas hamachlokas v'omrim sheploni somech al davar ploni u'ploni somach al davar ploni v'kiyos b'zeh. And they explain, oh, this guy relies on this and this guy relies on that. Okay, aval svaras mi shechashav shagam hadinim sheyesh behem machlokas kabbalah mi Moshe. But if someone were to hold that a law where there is a machlokas, if someone were to hold that was received from Moshe, the nafla behem machlokas machmas taus b'kabbalah oshichacha, and an error fell into the and the machlokas developed because of an error in the transmission or because of someone forgetting. And one of the two sides is correct in his tradition and the other is incorrect. Or he forgot, or he didn't hear everything he needed to from his Rav. Maybe and this guy who claims this brings a proof from the statement that says once there was an increase in students of Hillel and Shammai who didn't serve their masters properly, then machlokas proliferated in Israel and the Torah became like 2 Torahs. Okay, so you got the Shita? Mm-hmm. The guy who says that? That is a very despicable and bizarre shita, and it's improper, and it is not in line with principles. Weird statements there. And we have, thank you. It casts aspersions on the men who have received the Torah. And all of this is invalid. And what brings people to this inferior hashkafa, this degenerate hashkafa, corrupt hashkafa, mute yedias divrei hachachamim hanimtzayim b'Talmud, is lack of knowledge of the words of chachamim in the Talmud. Lefi shematzu she'apirish mekubal mimoshe, for they find that the explanation is received from Moshe. V'zei nachon lefi ha'klam mishukdamnu, and that's true according to the principles we laid out. But they don't differentiate between the general principles and that were received and the chidushim that were learned out through the din. Okay, so hold on just a second. I think this is a good place to stop. So let me just summarize here. So he's saying like this: how do you know which halachos were given to God at Sinai or given by God at Sinai if there's no machlokas on them? Right. If there is any machlokas, then ipso facto, it must not have been given at Sinai. So it's a very easy rule. Okay, the problem is that there are problems with it. Okay, for example, one of the biggest problems is the Rambam says in Hilchos Shofar V'Sukkah V'Lulav that we forgot how to do the trua. Whether it's yalala or anacha or both. Whether it's what we call like trua shvarim or shvarim trua, right? And also, where the Rambam says there's no machlokas in halacha l'Moshe Sinai, there are cases where there's a machlokas in halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So the only one I know who has done a comprehensive analysis on all of this and given a shiur on this is Rabbi Chait, who gave the 1993 Masorah shiur, which is supposedly the best the best shvuah shiur that was ever given in yeshiva, a historic one. I've only listened to the first couple of and the shvuah shiur are all good.
How was it recorded?
What he does is he gave it on Shavuos and then he would go through it afterwards over the days after Shavuos, and it was never as good. Well, okay, let me put it this way: it was never as exciting. It was always better afterwards because after he's working it through the Talmidim over the course of like many days, but like the excitement apparently was like always better on Shavuos. But anyway, so I say if he takes up all these questions and tries to explain the Rambam again. I say tries to explain it because I heard that he does explain the Rambam, but then when I asked him this question, he said he didn't have an answer. So I don't know if he recanted his answer or if he missed, if he.
There's cases which don't.
There's tons of cases where this doesn't apply, and also it just seems like it seems sketchy.
Yeah, I mean that's the entire Gemara. Basically, just
right. Yeah. Right. So, well, it's okay. Let's
tell me that the whole thing is derbanan.
No. So the first of all, just to clarify here, you can have a machlokes in a matter that is d'oraisa, right? Just not in meaning it just would mean that there is, according to the Rambam, it would just mean that there's no Kabbalah on it. There's no tradition on that particular thing. So let's say, for example, like let's say. Pick a contemporary example. Let's say like a new technology is invented, right? Yeah. And we have to see whether it violates a malacha d'oraisa. We can argue about that, and we're arguing about a d'oraisa, but it's just there's no tradition on that case,
Okay.
But what I was going to say was that the problem. Oh, so when you say that, like almost everything is d'Rabbanan, if you look at like the core of all the mitzvos, like of any given mitzvah, there's really like rarely, if ever, any machlokas on the core of the mitzvah. Like shofar stands out in my mind as one of the ones where the fact that we don't know what a trua is and that's what the mitzvah is, that to me is like a big thing. But on the vast majority of mitzvah, like no one, let's take the arba minim, right? No one argues on what the species are. No one argues on how many that we have. No one argues on what you have to do in terms of picking it up. No one argues that there's 7 days in Mikdash and what, all of the basic things are there. Yeah.
Let's go to the second part. Is it possible to have a halacha Moshe Sinai where they bring rayas for, but the rayas aren't drashas?
That's a good question also. Right, because the Rambam says that the hallmark of Halacha Moshe Sinai is that there's no remez in the pasuk, but you're asking.
Or this is the first thing. If there's like, we can darshan it out, and it comes from Moshe.
Right.
Or on the other hand, on the other second service, there's Halacha Moshe Sinai, where there's no support for it whatsoever.
Right.
Which makes it is it to say if you have Halacha Moshe Sinai.
So let me clarify the terminology here because I think the Rambam himself says this is. Pre-Eitz Hadar is a halacha that comes to us from Moshe at Sinai, but we don't call it a halacha Moshe Sinai. We reserve the term halacha Moshe Sinai for things that are only directly from Moshe, not in the pasuk. So the first two categories are all from Sinai, are both from Sinai, whether or not they have a remez in the pasuk, but we only call the second one halacha Moshe Sinai. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So going back to your original question about how do you know what is derabbanan or what is derived by the rabbanan and what's not, Rambam would say easy. Is it subject to machlokas or not? If it's not, then that means it was a Kabbalah, And again, like you do have plenty of drushos that no one disagrees on what the drasha is of, like what are some famous ones? Like I mean, again, like I just think of the Kriya one because those are the examples he gives, but like a pri hadar be'etz mishana lashana, a pri that dwells on its on its fruit that dwells on its tree from year to year. That's the esrog. Or tam she'eto eitz shetam eto perio shavin. That's a drasha. But all these drashas no one disagrees with. So those are all drashas from Sinai.
So this is like so this is problematic. But that's
But yeah.
It's also fun to show her. I've wondered what Kelso Moshe saying that could be, like, say, with shofar. Moshe never defined it. It's just he said the word. It was obvious. It's just obvious what it means. So it's just nothing that was ever sit down and defined because it was just that's what the word means.
Right. So the Sefer HaChinuch holds something like that, I believe, about shofar, which is that the Torah did not prescribe a specific type of cry.
I say Torah didn't prescribe. Just there's nothing that Moshe expounded. That expounded means like he defined it, where Moshe just said this is the thing. Right. And it's just to anyone then there was obvious. There's nothing for Moshe to have said. Right. There's no Kabbalah for Moshe because it's just you're arguing. It's just you're arguing over what that word means.
Yeah, I hear that. I don't know the answer. It's a possibility. I'm not sure. Yeah. All right. You had one more big question?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a big question.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe it's not. But so, according to Moshe, basically, well, actually, so another question which I just thought of is that are most of the things then crowns, so to speak? Most of the things, most of like halacha.
It's interesting. I mean, first, most of halacha is d'Rabbanan, right? That's not even. Right, yeah, but the ones that are like attached to the psukim, and that's another question I have, by the way, about which d'Rabbanans do they attach to psukim, and the difference between a semichah and a limud. That's I don't know that, but are most halachos that are derived just this is the other thing also. I don't know the difference between crowns and, let's say, like Yid Gomel Miyosha Torah Nidreshes ban. I don't know if that's a different status. I've never seen a Gemara where they darshan a crown, Like I'm familiar with the Gemara where they talk about Rabbi Akiva doing that. I'm just not familiar with the one where they do that.
So to be clear though, when God is putting in these quote unquote crowns, he doesn't have any specific interpretation in mind. So it's just that he knows that there will be interpretation. Right.
That's my interpretation. So that's my interpretation of that midrash, which is that what Rabbi Akiva is darshaning, God did not put into the Torah. God just gave him the hook or the basis to be creative and have these things. But again, I'm pretty sure there are other people who hold that God did encode them into the Torah.
Yeah, that sounds way better.
It sounds way better why do
we like that?
I am just not under the impression from everything I've read about drashos that's how drashos work. I don't have a specific source.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if according to Moshe, we have the right basically to use our Hakdamah to understand these crowns.
Yeah.
Does that mean that and everyone has the right everyone who's a Chacham has the right to do that.
Right.
And we can disagree with anyone basically as long as we're educated in the sugya and whatnot. Right. So I mean that if I don't know Tchiv Metim happened and then somebody from somebody who was at Har Sinai comes up and then they're doing something. Right. And I see that they're doing something radically different than mine, or maybe mine are different than mine. I can does that even matter though?
Okay, so
or as long as I have my svara, then it doesn't matter.
Right. So let me correct a premise, which you might not have gotten wrong, but the way you said it indicated maybe I need to clarify is the crowns is different than paskining. The crowns is coming up with new structural halachos which need to be ratified by the Sנהדרין. But what you said about each person being a chacham and relying on that, that's not, no one has the right to just like look at crowns and like make up new halachos.
I'm confused.
Okay, so there's two things. Okay, there's hora'ah, which is what we call that psak, which is where you go through the sugya and you learn through the shas and the poskim and what's Torah B'Ksav, Torah Peh, and you arrive at a conclusion about how to act. Okay. That's what Moshe was talking about throughout most of the Hakdamah.
And everyone has the right to do that.
Everyone has the right to do that who's qualified. Yeah, right.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Okay, right. And the crowns, though, that's like a method of coming up with new halachic structures, which no one can institute on their own. That needs to be done through the Sanhedrin. Mm-hmm. Right. But so now going to your question, though, your question is about psak then. So let's say you go through the sugya and you have a certain way of paskening. Moshe goes through the sugya and has a certain way of paskening. And then Tchiz Mesim happens and Moshe Rabbeinu's there, right? And he's doing it differently. So then can Moshe keep going according to his own reasoning?
I mean, not even necessarily Moshe. I think Moshe Rabbeinu is a little different because.
Oh, fine. You should have been done. You should have been done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah. So the answer to that question, I do want to read because it is a good reminder about how bad our halacha is nowadays. So this is in Hilchos Mamrim, Aleph. Yeah.
So it's really what does it even be called? Because for certain things, we're for sure as well. For sure, Moshe did something.
Right.
So just so what? So what does it mean Moshe taught something? Like I try to find something out. Like is like similar like say I don't know. Let's just trying to think. Like is there machlokes about saying like Devorah on Shabbos?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
We're basically just try to clarify things because there are for certain things that Moshe did one way or another. They just end up having machlokes on.
Like what?
Like I imagine there's a machlokes Shabbos about whether something's Devorah.
Okay.
Moshe would have done one of the things, like
right. Just like in general, any given machloket, Moshe had a response to it.
Or not just example, like
right.
Just or imagine you have a court case where it's machlokes about just how you divide property or something. If
sure, yes, okay.
Or I imagine maybe the court case came from Moshe. I'll say that. I imagine you have machlokes over whether things borrowed there or so.
Okay.
To say Moshe never did anything, I would need to say Moshe if never did borrow in that way.
It's a weird case you're asking about because like we're looking at Moshe doing isurim, or we're looking at actions Moshe didn't do. Like I don't get how we can even have that. I don't get that. Yeah. Okay. So going back to Oren's question here. So this is in Hilchos Mamrim Perak Aleph, right? There's a question about like what do we do in the Tchias Mesim? Okay, right. So this is
I don't just mean literally like when that happens.
No, I know.
Conceptually.
Yeah, conceptually, yeah. So he says like this. Beisin Hagadol should be Yerushalayim, and then we got to go through a couple halachos here. And then we'll see him state what we read in the Hakdamah to the Lephirosh Mishnayos in the Mishnah Torah.
Yeah, like similar to Shammai versus Hillel about how much water you need for mikvah.
Right.
For sure, Moshe had mikvahs.
Right, but it doesn't matter what he had or didn't have. What matters is, do we have a tradition that was taught, and is there opposition to that tradition?
But I guess what I'm trying to think is like if he actually did one shita, does it count as a teaching?
That I don't know, especially with Moshe Rabbeinu. I don't know. Okay, Beisin Hagadol should be Yerushalayim. Him Iker Torah Sheba'al Peh. So the Great Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim, that is the root of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Him Amud HaHorah, and they are the pillar of psak. And from them, statute and judgment go out to all of Israel. Torah, regarding them, the Torah promises, Shnemar, as it says, according to the Torah that they instruct you, and according to the judgment that they tell you, you shall do. That is a positive commandment. That's why we have to obey the Sanhedrin. Anyone who believes in Moshe Rabbeinu and his Torah is obligated to make his religious acts dependent on them, he shine on them, and to rely on them. I don't know what the difference is between those two things, but relying on them for halacha. Anyone who doesn't act according to their psak, over below sase, transgresses a lo sase. As it says, you may not deviate from anything that they tell you. You don't get malchus for violating this because it's given over to it's subject to a death penalty by Beis Din. Any chacham who paskins against them gets the death penalty by strangulation. As it says, okay. So then he defines the parameters. You know, maybe I don't need to do this right now. As much as important as that is. Okay, hold on just a second here. Okay, so I'm skipping a halacha. I'm skipping the halacha about what the categories of durabbanans are.
I just referred off.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Gimel. So this is where he says what we just read. Divrei Kabbalah, matters of tradition, there's never any machlokas in them. Anything that you find a machlokas in, you can know that it is not a tradition from Moshe. Things you learn out through one of those methods. If they are agreed upon by all of Beis Din Hagadol, then they are agreed upon. They're unanimous. And if they disagree, we follow the majority. And then they produce one halacha for everybody. Okay, and then he goes into the Rabbanans, which we're skipping. Now we get to your question. Kishahaya Beis Din Hagadol Kayam, when there is a Beis Din Hagadol, this actually segues into the sugya we're doing today. Okay, we're going to do today. Are we going to do today? We'll see. When there is a Beis Din Hagadol in existence, Lo Haisa Sham Machlokas B'Yisrael, then there was no Machlokas in Israel. Okay. Now it doesn't mean people didn't disagree, right? But it meant that there's no machlokas in practice. Ella kol din shenolad bo safek le'echad misrael, any halacha where there was a doubt that arose in Israel, shoal lebeis din shab'iro, the person would ask the local beis din. Im yada'u, if they knew it, amrulo, they would tell him. V'im lav, and if not, hari hashol im oso beis din o im shlucho olin liYerushalayim. So then that guy who asked the question with the beis din or with the shliach would go up to Yerushalayim. And they would ask the Beis Din on Har HaBayis. Im Yadu, if they knew, Amru Lahem, then they would say to them, Im Lav, and if not, Hakol Bain Beis Din al Pesach Azara. Then they would go to the Beis Din at the entrance of the courtyard. Im Yadu, Amru Lahem. If they knew, they would tell them. The Im Lav Hakol Bain Lelishkas Agazis Beis Din Agado V'Sholin. Then they would go to the Beis Din in the Chamber of Hewn Stones, which is the Sandhedrin Agado, and they would ask. If the Beis Din Hagadol knew it, bein pi hakabala, whether from tradition, bein min hamida shedanuba, or through one of the midos, omin lahem yad, they would tell them immediately, v'im lo, and if not, hayadavar barer etzel Beis Din Hagadol. If the matter was not clear by Beis Din Hagadol, danim bo b'shatan, they would immediately engage in analysis, v'nostim b'davar, and they would debate about it, ad sheyaskimu kulan, until all of them agreed, o yamdu l'minyan, or they would take account, v'yelhu achar harov, and they would follow after the majority, v'yomru l'chol hasholin kach halacha, v'yelchu lahem, and they would say to anyone who asks, this is the halacha, and then people would follow it. But then, mi shebatal Beis Din Hagadol, once the Beis Din Hagadol dissolved, or was nullified, Rabsa Machlokas B'Yisrael. Then Machlokas increased in Israel. This guy says it's Tameh and gives his own reason. And that guy does the opposite. And then he says the principle, which is now, two Chachamim or two Batei Dinim who disagree, not at a time of Sanhedrin, Im ad shlo higia hadavar lahen, bein bizman echad bein b'zeh achar zeh, if it was before the matter reached them, I don't know what that means, whether at one time or whether one after the other, one, whatever, they disagree on Tameh Tahor, Asr Matir. In other words, if you don't have a chance to resolve it, so if it is Deoraisa, Halacha Achar HaMachmir, go after the stringent, then you go according to the lenient one. So, but earlier, the Rambam in the Hakdamah says, and then I'll summarize the answer to your question in a second. This one I do want you to write down in the letter. Yeah, I'll tell you in a second as soon as I find it. It's going to be Kofin. Yeah. This is the Halacha Lamed of the Mishnah Torah. Lamed Beis. Yeah, so we talked about Batei Dinim now. B'chol Beis Din she'amar achar haTalmud b'chol Medina v'gazar o hiskin o hinhig livnei medinaso o livnei medinaso lo pashtu masa b'chol Yisrael. So any Beis Din that arose after the Talmud in each and every province who made a decree or enacted an enactment or made a minhag for the people in that society or for multiple societies, it did not spread out to all of Israel. Because of the distance of their settlement and the deterioration of the paths. Because the Beis Din of that city is just individuals, and a large Beis Din of 70 was nullified many years before the Talmud. Therefore, we don't force the people of one place to follow the minhag of another place. And we don't compel any Beis Din to make a gezerah for another.
He calls it a minhag?
No, this is This is the part we skip. There's 3 types of derabbanans. There's takana, gezerah, and then there's minhag. Not the way we use the word minhag. There's things that are instituted by the Sanhedrin as minhagim. Same thing if one of the Gaonim learned that the way of the law was like that. And another Beis Din arose that says that's not the law. We don't listen to the first guy. Whoever your das follows, like Rav Moshe said, whether Rishon or Achron. So some of the matter is that whether it's in the times of Mashiach or whether it's Bisman Hazeh, if you have a Sanhedrin Hagadol, so there will be no machlokas, because effectively they'll paskin for everybody on all doubts, and the only machlokas will be in your mind and how to learn it. But in practice, there will be one halacha for everybody. But then in the absence of a Sanhedrin, then it all goes according to what Moshe Feinstein says, which is each chacham paskins the way that he sees fit. And you have a ton of machlokas in Israel, and it's very bad, for like unity of practice in halacha.
That means that once Chiyat Meitim happens, and then like in the 5 days before we establish a new Sanhedrin,
it's gonna be wild parties of halacha.
I'll see them, and I don't necessarily need to do what they're doing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. You keep following your psak. Yeah. Now you might change what you're doing because you'll go to a shiur from.
Really good reason.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Wait, does it say Lamed or no?
Just Lamed based on the Gimel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. A question on that.
Yeah.
This might be case specific, but there's a story in Gemara Menachot where they're arguing about how many tzitzit strings you're supposed to have. You're supposed to have 3 or 4, or meaning doubled over into 6 or 8.
Right.
And then there's a story about one guy who went to the midbar, meaning a rabbi, one of the Amoraim went to the midbar, and he happened to see all the graves of the people who died in the desert.
Yeah.
And then he comes back and he's telling all the Rebbeim, like all of the other people in the Beit Midrash about the cool time he had on occasion. And then they're like, "Oh my God, you saw all the graves. How many tzitzit do they wear?" And he's like, "Shoot, I forgot."
That's funny.
But the point is what I want to ask is why would if this is true, why would they even ask? It shouldn't matter.
Yeah. So that's my. I told you earlier that I never understood the argument that we don't rely on archaeological evidence if the archaeological evidence is sound, right? Like if you don't know whatever, who it belonged to, and you don't know if it's authoritative, I get it. But the case I heard about, which I have not seen inside, is that there was a machlokas on how to do zrika of the dam in the Kodesh at the paroches, at the curtain, and I think I want to say it was machlokas whether you sprinkle it in front of or on. And I think there's a story, I assume it's in the Gemara, that one of the Tanaim saw the actual paroches and testified on that basis and it counted or something. So I'm with you on your question. I would think that it would matter, and again, it would matter in the way that I said is that it would be because we would weigh the thing differently. I don't know about the case I fabricated last time of if you found something that, if it's machlokas Rashi or Rabbeinu Tam on tefillin, and then you found a pair of tefillin that just had something completely different, I don't know what we do in that case. If we would just say it must be I don't think we would say it must be that because there's no real svara. Would we try to come up with would that be an impetus to come up with a svara? Probably. Yeah, that's where it gets.
Are you saying that in the TT case, they wouldn't use whatever archaeological data they got just to be now we must do that, but they would use it to then try to come up with svaras to justify it, or that they would meaning pre-existing svaras differently? Yeah,
but either of those 2 possibilities, because at the end of the day, you don't artifacts don't paskin, only minds paskin, so it's going to have to come through a svara. Yeah.
I guess the question is, what counts as good? I realize this is sort of a tough question. What counts as good day in that? For certain things, we know that various Jews were sinning, so
right. That's the big problem.
I feel like Holy Edition also need proof that not only that say this was tefillin, but that was tefillin made by somebody who we consider kosher.
Correct. Yeah. That's where the real sketchiness comes in, right? Like just because we find scrolls in Qumran doesn't mean that that's like the proper girsa of the Torah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any more?
I think that's it.
Okay. Good.
Wow.
We were right. You had good questions. Lots of good discussions. Okay. New sugya. So we'll start this today. Obviously, this is going to last into next week. Yeah.
I guess just something over was say like I think there's a Halacha Moshe we see like it says four just it says four where it says things four Allah.
Right.
Well,
so that's a different. That's the difficult thing also because the shiurim are all Halacha Moshe Sinai, but they're based on like real world objects. So like. That's where you get into olive problems, right? And that's where you also get into like, the what's the thing? You had all the Ashkenazic, not all. You have the Ashkenazic poskim who were machmir on the size of a kazayas because they'd never seen an olive before, so they were machmir like out of an abundance of caution. And then you have like achronim being machmir on the Rishonim, so then you get like Chazon Ish's olive that will like crush you to death if it falls on you. But then they have like I think they have olive tree groves in Israel that like genetically were around in the time that the Jews were in Israel. And we know how big those olives are, So like, do you rely on that or not? Like it gets into this weird crossover of like, empirical data and halacha.
It also just sort of, like things often drift in meaning. So actually what how much you can roll on all sides. For example, the English pound currency has like a long time ago stopped having anything to do with the pound itself.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So just I don't know, like if you interpret a pound to mean a pound of silver and try to interpret modern English law, you just get stupid.
Right. So then that's the other question also, which kind of plays into all of this as well, which is, and I don't want to touch this with what's the phrase, 10-foot pole? Yeah. Right. What status does minhag have in these areas in terms of just relying on what people have done? I think I brought this up in our tefillah shir, but with, pronunciations of letters, then there are people who will say that we are responsible to try to figure out the most authentic historical pronunciations possible. And then there are people who will say like, no, either you may rely on the minhag. So let's say Ashkenazim pronouncing it as a sav instead of a thav, right? Or you are obligated to rely on Masorah because in a sense, Masorah is more certain than historical speculation, and certain in the sense of at least I know that I'm relying on what was practiced before me, and that person was,
But like I guess with the historical speculation, where you think every individual combination is most likely for it to be sort of can assume that at least one part's going to be wrong. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So like I don't know how that goes. Also,
what about like in those cases where we know how it's pronounced?
What do you mean by now?
I don't think we can.
Like also was pronounced because we know they had variation.
That's
right.
True.
Right.
So,
and even if we found, let's say we found a thing that like in the time of Ezra it was pronounced a certain way. So is that a proof that in the time of Moshe it was pronounced that way? Like it's gonna be very hard to.
Right, but so the thing I'm thinking of is that I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, Ben Asher, the guy who
the Torah guy.
Yeah, Torah guy. I'm pretty sure he or like his group also wrote a book about proper way to pronounce things.
Yeah,
because that was like part of the same thing. And so we still have that, and so we can see how they pronounce.
That's interesting.
So
yeah,
that's 1,000 years ago. Obviously, that's not 3,000 years
right,
ago.
Yeah,
but that's better than now. But
right. So that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. There are those who would say you go with the best data you have, and you should go with that. And then there are those who say no, like Davka, go with you have to. The Ashkenazi minhag pronunciation has become this, and this is what you must do. Right. And again, like I don't think Rabbi changed his psak. I just think people don't know about it anymore. But like when we were in yeshiva, then he paskined that if you are Sephardic or you pronounce your tav and you go and get called up to the Torah, you have to say Baruch Hu Es Hashem HaMavorach because this is an Ashkenazic minyan, and you have to pronounce it that way. Because that's the halacha.
Does Sephardim have to do that?
Sephardim have to do that. Yeah. So if you see Saul Ezos, when he gets called up to the Torah, he pronounces Ashkenazic.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Does he? I think you also mentioned this word. Does he say that you should do that also just like privately?
I don't know what he says to do privately. Yeah, I'm not sure.
How does that work? Like, I mean, I'm like genetically or my family history is Ashkenazi, but when I grew up, I was taught like Israeli Hebrew.
Right. So I had a friend, again, I don't know what the current psak is, but I had a friend who was a Baal Korah in yeshiva, and he was in the same position. And the psak was that Ashkenazit is not a legitimate halachic opinion.
That's Israeli, right?
Yeah, Israeli, right? Yeah. That either you're doing it full Sephardic or you're doing it full Ashkenazic.
Why not?
I don't recall the reasoning, but that was the psak, and so my Baal Korah friend had to like lean full Ashkenazic. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. And again, we're talking a shiloh that was asked like when I was in yeshiva, whatever 20 years ago. So like I don't know if things changed, but yeah.
All right.
Okay. So now we're gonna start the first halachas. No, it's good. It's good. We're not in any rush. So we want to take up the topic of semichah, of Mosaic semichah versus modern day semichah. So this is Halacha Sanhedrin. If you want to look in your Rambams there, you don't have to, but I don't have printouts. Sanhedrin, והעונשין, המסורין להן, Daled. Perek Daled. Yeah, we're gonna do.
Daled, Perek Daled, Halacha.
Yeah, we're gonna just try to do all Perek Daled. Bli neder. Okay, Echad Beis Din Hagadol, O Sanhedrin Ketana, O Beis Din Shel Shlosha. So whether the big Sanhedrin or the small Sanhedrin or a Beis Din of 3. Each of them needs to be smichad from someone who was smichad. Okay, ordained from someone who was ordained. And again, smicha literally means to lean, right? Moshe Rabbeinu samach Yoshua b'yad. Moshe gave smicha to Yoshua by hand. Shneimar, as it says, vayismoch es yadav alav vayitzavehu. He leaned his hands on him and commanded him. Okay, so that's what smicha is the leaning of the hands from Moshe. V'chein hashivim zakenim. So too with the Shivim Zakenim in the time of Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu Samachan. Moshe Rabbeinu gave them smicha. B'sharas aleim shchina. Please just throws the shchina here. He didn't throw that in with Yeshua, right? But he says, and the shchina dwelled on them.
The shchina requires the collective?
I don't know. I mean, I thought shchina can be on an individual person. It could be on a navi. V'osam zakenim sampu lacherim. Those, and I also don't know what shchina has to do with smicha. We certainly don't hold that anyone who has smicha needs to have shchina if shchina means nevuah.
What would you say your slideshow was wrong with your own shchina?
That was about shchina when we talk about like the chazal uses of shchina dwelling. I assume, now it could be the Rambam means that. I assume he means here it's nevuah because that's literally what happened in the psukim, right? Yeah.
Okay, so like what would you say your slideshow was shchina?
That was how Chazal use it. This is how. Oh, that which manifests the greatness of God, or God's hashgacha, or created light, if you prefer.
Collective visual having a great chachma manifests the greatness of God.
Yeah, but I think here he means actual nevuah. Okay, the Osam has a kenim sam halacherim. Those kenim gave smicha to others. V'acherim lacherim, and they gave to others. V'nimtu hasmuchin ish mipi ish ad beis dino shel Yoshua ad beis dino shel Moshe. So interesting how he makes the division here, right? There's like I'll translate that. And it goes back that you have the smuchim from one person to the other, up until the beis din of Yoshua, up until the beis din of Moshe. Like he divides between Yoshua and Moshe, and the beis din. The echad nismach mipi hanasi or mipi echad min hasmuchim. It doesn't matter whether you got your smicha from the nasi, who's the head of the Sanhedrin, or from one of the other people who got smicha. Even if the guy who got smicha was not part of a Sanhedrin. So in other words, smicha is not a function of Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is a function of smicha. Yeah.
But can you receive smicha from someone who's not Sanhedrin?
Yes, that's what we just said. Even if the guy was never on the Sanhedrin, as long as he got smicha, then he's good. The ketzad he has smicha ledoros. So what is smicha for generations? Now, this does not mean smicha b'zman hazeh. What is smicha like going forward after Moshe Rabbeinu? Oh, sorry, no, this is now. Sorry, this is smicha now. Okay, fine, I was wrong. Lo sheyismechu yadeim al rosh hazaken. Not that they place the hands on the head of the elder. Elo shekorin lo Rebbe. Rather, they call him Rebbe. V'omrim lo hariat samuch. Behold, thou art samucht. And you have the ability to judge even cases of knasos. Now, I gotta interject here for 1 second here. We've been using the word psak as the translation of hora'ah. Okay, there is a difference in halacha between hora'ah and din. Hora'ah is you learning and coming up with a halacha conclusion and acting in accordance with it. Din is an act of the court. Okay, and the case where this is very clear, and this is not exactly necessarily according to the Rambam, and this is also opening a can of worms, but getting to the issue of women, and the rabbinate, right? So the classic, this distinction is evident. I think this is like a thing that's always quoted is, there's an isser to give hora'ah while drunk, okay? And there's an isser of srara, of authority for women, right? To hold certain positions of authority. So the Sefer HaChinuch, again, this is not the Rambam, but the Sefer HaChinuch says that a woman cannot be a dayan, okay? But then when he's talking about the isser to Paskin while drunk, he says this isser applies whether to men or to women. So women, according to the Sefer HaChinuch, can Paskin, they can give hora'ah, and everything that Rav Moshe Feinstein said applies to them, but they can't be on a beis din and be done, give dinim,
What's the difference between those two things again?
So just yeah, right.
What's din then?
The din is a court pronouncement.
What does that mean?
So that means that like, let's say, I think it's easier if you think about it in English or in American law, like you can ask a lawyer for an interpretation of a law, but then that has a different status than a judge hitting the gavel and saying like 4 years in prison, So that's like an act that's sanctioned by a judicial authority. Whereas psak is really like, like a doctor diagnosing something or giving, it's someone relying on expert knowledge and then telling you how to act.
Right.
Yeah. So a woman can do that. Again, I don't know about the Rambam, but according to the Sefer HaChinuch, a woman can do that. She just can't be on a Sanhedrin, which raises the whole question about like women and what rabbis are today. Like, that's why it's such a question, because, rabbis today are not functioning. I mean, a rabbi on a beis din is a different thing, but like, what is the status of psak today? Yeah. Anyway, all right, we could put that can of worms in the shelf, because I don't know what the Rambam holds by that. Okay, anyway.
Well,
yeah.
Do you need to be a rabbi to be on a beis din?
I don't. Well.
This kind of makes it sound like yes, but I don't understand why.
Yeah, I mean, this does make it sound like yes. Yeah.
Why would that be required?
I don't know what the status is of nowadays based bate dinim and how our modern day smicha plays into that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
What's more machmir, knasos or whipping?
I think whipping, because we don't do whipping anymore, but we do knasos, right? Or I mean, they can do knasos, I think. Let's read and see. Ve'in somkin smicha zo she mino has a kenim dayanus ela b'shlosha. We only do this smicha. So now we have two smichos. We have smicha for Moshe, then we have a smicha for dayanus, right? It says ein somkin smicha zo she mino has kenim dayanus ela b'shlosha. We only do a smicha for zakenim for dayanus with 3. And that's if one of them receives smicha from others. So this is interesting, right? Does this mean that he has to receive others going all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu?
What is he saying? He's saying there's 2 different kinds of smicha?
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean with 3?
Meaning that you need 3 people present.
Oh.
I think. Yeah. You need 3 people present, meaning it needs to be that this smicha needs to be Moshe's smicha can be done on a one-to-one basis. This smicha needs to be done from a beis din to an individual, and one member of that beis din needs to have received smicha from others. But my question is, when he says smicha from others, does that mean like from Moshe? Sounds like Rav Makbili says yes, because he says see above halacha aleph.
Well, maybe it's saying conscious that can't be all 3 receive the smicha on a one-to-one. There has to be one that not do one-to-one.
I don't think so. I think it just means you need bare minimum of 1 who received it. Yeah.
Well, how do you have to choose a Canaan?
Well, that's why I'm wondering if even this is dependent on going back to Moshe Rabbeinu.
It says one of them has to be
right, but mi pi acherim. I maybe pi acherim just means it has to be from some other group of 3, not necessarily going back to Moshe Rabbeinu.
It wasn't any other group of 3 because it's impossible that all of them could have gotten it from that same group of 3 because
right.
Because then you have
the chain of Moshe smicha, right? Going through all generations.
Or just because you'd have to, if you need people to give it, and one of the people who's currently on the basis receiving it, there has to have been someone in his place.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's stop for today because this is our stopping time, and then we'll have to continue this on next week.
What does like modern smicha look like? They just write your certificate?
I think there's no uniform thing. Yeah.
Like when you got.
I don't think it was I don't think it was a uniform thing. I mean, certificates are needed for like if you need proof of stuff,
Right.
but like I don't think there's like dependent on writing a certificate. There isn't like a star or anything like that.
I mean, literally, like when
It
like,
did totally.
you got semichah. So what is that? What?
I'm
What is the
gonna
process of getting semichah look like?
I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.
Just because I don't want to